Organization performing the bulk of mental health assessments during the process of initiating weapons restrictions orders under Maine's yellow flag is addressing a dramatic uptick in utilization since the mass shootings in Lewiston. Ben Strick is Spurwink's Vice President of Adult Behavioral Health Services. He says there's no clear pattern or reason why the yellow flag law has been used so frequently over the last 3 weeks. Data shows since they started doing telehealth evaluations 13 months ago, 63 weapons restriction orders have been approved by judges. That number, he says, is roughly double the previous 2 years combined.
It's really striking examples of law enforcement working to prevent suicides, homicides, and use of deadly force. And often it's multiple days worth of work from an officer to ensure that the community is safe.
Documents from the Office of Maine's Attorney General show 3 recent subjects specifically mentioning the Lewiston shooter by name. A November 7th incident is also documented, stating a suicidal man was concerned he, quote, will be the next mass shooter.